Thank you so much. I am seeing people joining in this session. There are new people that they are coming into this breakout session. My name is Hernán Weiler. I am working with risks and controls and cybersecurity, and I've been in this area for the last 24 years. I started my career playing with IT and risks, and today is a pleasure for me to share a model in order to quantify the cybersecurity risks. Let me please share my screen, and we are going to distribute the slides at the end, and also you can reach out to me in order to get the template with the model. Let me share the entire screen, and now you should be able to see the initial screen. We have plenty of methodologies trying to assess cybersecurity risks. Many of them, they are a combination between control efficiencies combined with losses and historical losses for each threat vector. There are vulnerability analysis. There are also control assessment that they are populating those methodologies. Scores related to threat prevalence and how much we are expecting a control to mitigate a threat vector as it can be done for all the IT assets. And in this analysis, we are not only populating subjective data, we are also having a lot of issues with dirty data. None of these statistics is, at the end of the day, producing a scenario that we can fully understand the perimeter, the threat vector, what it means in terms of the threat. And at the end of the day, just data cocktails with scores and generic data that is not related to a specific scenario is not going to be better than the heat maps that we are saying that they are misleading and they are not producing corporate defense, they are not producing good decision making information at the end of the day. So just because we are having a number in a methodology that is coming from scores and different systems that they are assuming some relationship and proxies between threats, controls, and final impact, doesn't mean that we are able to justify that we have a quantitative approach into risks. Because at the end of the day, for each risk scenario, we need to understand the impact in terms of the cost, and we should be able to calculate how much is the reposition cost for our hardware if it is damaged, how much we need to invest in terms of recovering and regenerating data, how much we need to use time for developers in order to improve wrong coding, or how much we can impact our users that they are unable to use an asset for a while because the risk that they had materialized. And at the end of the day, each of these costs is different for each asset and service group of assets. So trying to use a generic approach that is not linked to a scenario is finally not able to do the proper assessment, and because of that, we are unable also to understand which are the type of impacts that we need, the to have a contingency plan or which kind of factors we need to have in a prevention plan. Another issue that I am detecting in this area is that we are not assessing compliance and revenue losses that they are coming from IT impacts. In the IT organization, in cybersecurity, we are able to tell much better how much it will be the downtime cost in the best and worst scenario if there is an application that is not running or there is an asset that is finally offline. We can tell how much is the notification and response cost if there is a data breach, for instance, that we need to notify different parties. We can tell how much is the cost of our assets, how much will take, for instance, to replace a piece of software or hardware that is damaged because of an attack or a natural hazard fire. We are able to tell how much we need to pay in our sales agreements and service level agreements, how much credit we need to provide for a service if we are not meeting some standards. And we can calculate those penalties. And we can also calculate fraud losses coming from IT risks. However, when it comes to the non-IT impacts, when it comes to understanding how much will be the reputational impact of the IT risk, we are struggling, and we are struggling a lot. We are unable to understand the regulatory fines. We are always saying GDPR fine, and we are just always over-evaluating these losses. When it comes to the history of the fines, and we analyze more or less 500 law enforcement of GDPR in Europe, we can tell how much the article by article and type of industries and type of reach, how much it will be actual losses that we can extrapolate to our company. We are also struggling to understand how much will be the IP losses and how much it will be the competitive losses. And eventually also, we need to recognize that because of the IT risk, we may need to get the cost coming from replacing the CISO. And this is a thought-provoking cost here. And we need to start understanding the different factors in the cybersecurity risk. We got the first-tier losses. Those are the ones that they are impacting the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of data, and we can have a very good overview with the asset owner. So we can tell how many records will be breached, we can tell how many records will be corrupted, or how many hours a service will be unavailable. And the IT asset owner should be able to tell that. But when it comes to the second tier impact, the impact that is coming from compliance, for contracts, we need also to involve the owner of the compliance obligation, that they can tell how much it will be a fine. So we are looking for the data protection officer or a legal advisor or a compliance officer, and also the contract owner, that they can tell how much will be the compensation in the contract if we are unable to provide the service as it is expected. And also, we can also decompose the impact on the third-tier losses related to revenue, loss of revenue, opportunity losses, and how much, for instance, our marketing efforts will be depreciated because we have plenty of complaints because the service is down. And when it comes to the assessment of the third-tier losses, we can involve marketing. When it comes to modeling these losses, we need to understand that there are different probabilities and a scenario for these losses to occur. If we may have a breach, and we may have 100 customer data being lost. However, it's highly unlikely that we are going to have a large compliance issue. and it's extremely highly unlikely that we are going to have a revenue loss because it will not be visible for the media, for instance. So each of these losses have a different probability to occur. We have tools in risk management that are able to deal with these scenarios that are basically coming from decision trees. And we also need to assess the impacts when they are coming from confidentiality, integrity, and availability. For all the assets that they are finally also aggregated in a process, that they're finally aggregated in a service, depending on the level of granularity that we want to do the risk assessment. We can do an asset-based assessment, or we can do a service-based assessment of the risk. So depending on how much do you want to understand the risk factors, you can multiply for the confidentiality the number of records that they will be breached by the cost of the breach, the integrity exactly the same way, but the cost is related to the recovery, the regeneration of the data. And also availability, we need to think downtime. We are assessing this risk not in number of records, but in hours. And also we can have a standard cost for that service, that asset that can be used also to understand that the frequency for those risks are also different. In the model, I am using the log normal distribution that had a long tail of high visible incident, because according to the research, it's better representing the operational risks that we have in cybersecurity. And I agree, I kind of agree. And for some scenarios, if we are just doing an stochastic analysis, in risks that they may or may not occur fully, we can also use discrete probabilities. It depends, but we need to understand for this scenario what will be the frequency for the risk to materialize. And also very important, before we jump into the model in the last part of my session, I want to recommend that we are doing a back testing at the end. Whatever the model that you are using in order to produce an analysis on cybersecurity, being sure that at the end of the day, you are comparing which are the risks that they had been foreseen against which are the losses that they are finally materialized. And then you need to have, of course, a database of losses, attacks, near misses, different type of impacts, but being sure that you are able to collect the data on what is actually happening in order to improve the outcomes of your model. You need to, at least once a year, to think about your assessment, to think about your model and improve it, comparing what you were planning against what actually happened in your organization. You need to learn. So let me share a risk model. It's an Excel spreadsheet with an embedded and native Monte Carlo simulation that is assessing risk on objectives. When it comes to information security, we have plenty of assets, costs, policies, requirements that we can think about, and contracts that we can think that they are a real objective for the department to advance and to protect the IT assets, and also, at the end of the day, the strategy of our organizations. The model, it's very simple. It's you got the full disclosure about what is under the hood of the calculations. Many models, particularly when they are using Monte Carlo, simulation. They don't have the visibility on the formulas. I have them and I can explain that to you, and you can explain that to the business or a regulator or a prosecutor. There is a very good assessment from prosecutor that they are seeing a data-driven assessment. And also you are able to compare cost when they are quantified, to compare about the service insurance policy and the investment that you need to do. When it comes to Monte Carlo simulations, we need to assess the minimum and maximum values. Whether they are number of records, cost, downtime, it doesn't matter. You can choose here what you want to populate in the model. But at the end of the day, you have a confidence level. You may say, I am 80% sure that we are going to have between 100 and 200 euros loss if there is a denial of service attack in this service. Good. When you are saying that, it means that you are 20% unsure whether the cost will be lower than 100 or higher than 200. And because we are using a log normal distribution, we are being pessimistic. We think that there are more scenarios producing a loss that is higher than the maximum amount, 200, rather than the losses that they are lower than the minimum value that we say it will be 100. This is a way that we can use to assess the probability. And finally, this is the formula. You are going to see that in the Excel spreadsheet. Basically, it's a statistic is coming from probabilities and is linking the confidence level to the standard errors. And at the end of the day, it's working quite nicely. Let me just go and show you one example with 2 cases in Excel, and then you can contact me on LinkedIn or Twitter if you want to receive more guidance or the full template for this approach. Basically, you got the slides here also, but let me just show you a live presentation of the model. So this is the Excel spreadsheet. Basically, as examples, I added 2 scenarios. One scenario is very simple. There is a user that is attaching a wrong file in an email, and then we have an accidental disclosure of personal data. We can assess how much it will be the losses for the worst and the best scenario. This is confidentiality, so we need to look for number of records. Number of records here will be personal data for employees, contractors, and candidates. And then you can assess here the threats. You got the taxonomy that is also recommended here in the model. It's very practical and it's very comprehensive too. And it's also covering risks that they are coming for projects and IT projects. And then you can link the risk to your own assets. For instance, which is the asset at risk? And in this example, it would be human resources data. Who is the agent? So who is the player that is triggering this risk? Here, it will be an internal agent, employees. It helps a lot to identify the agents, the vector agents, because we can tell which kind of initiative we can use. For instance, in this case, training will be a particular measure that we can assess because of the internal nature of the agent. Then we can assess the confidence, and we are saying that If there is a data breach, we need to do some efforts in order to understand the extent of the information that was shared, trying to also do some kind of investigation, whether this is going to affect employees or not, and what is going to happen there. And we can assess and we can say that it's going to cost $1 per record. So the cost of this data breach only on IT, only on the IT impact, it will be $1,000 to $4,000. And then you can tell that you are 90% sure that this is the cost, because basically it's so constrained that is in this scenario, you can really tell what is going to happen. Anyway, when it comes to compliance, legal, regulatory, and revenue losses, the scenario is different, because you may need to assess a fine for GDPR Article 30, because you have disclosed the personal data without the proper technical controls. There was not data loss prevention, there was not training, and whatever. And you can assess according to the historical data that it's very easy to track. For instance, how much is going to be the impact here. It will be between $34,000 to $150,000 as the maximum and minimum fine that you will have for similar cases. You can also, in the ISO, identify the main controls that will be, for instance, acceptable use of IT assets, training and awareness. And then you can tell how much is the efficiency of the control, because basically this is a very soft control. You can say that the efficiency without data loss, without the monitoring, without the proper, I would say, access to the data that allow an employee to disclose these emails, you can say that the efficiency is 30%. You don't need to do something here if you don't need to assess inherent risk. I don't recommend to assess inherent risk. It's an information that we are never using because it's a non-plausible scenario. You cannot tell how much it will be the impact if there are no controls whatsoever, because there are always controls. There is always managerial accountability. There is also a code of conduct. There is also a security officer there. So trying to assess inherent risk is just something that we do for compliance. But because you know the residual risk at this level, you can assess the efficiency of this control and eventually trying to also link to auditing data. And finally, you can also, if you need, include this analysis in the model. But what is more important is that you are assessing the probability. So how often do you expect an employee disclosing 1 to 4,000 records by sending wrong attachments in the email? In this model, we are assessing, as an example, that we are expecting this risk to be materialized in the best scenario once each 10 years. It means that we are expecting this risk to happen once we have an exposition for this risk of 10% a year. And in the worst scenario, we are expecting this risk to materialize each 5 years. So it means 20% probabilities to occur on an annual basis. Finally, you can also assess the confidence for this level, and the model is going to produce a histogram. So let me just show you what is under the hood, because the formulas are fully disclosed in the model. But what you are getting here is the assessment of the Monte Carlo simulation in 10,000 different scenarios, and how much is randomly, according to this formula, foreseen that is going to be a loss. So these are all the scenarios. You can also, if you want, create a loss exceedance curve. If you want, just let me do this work manually. And then you can see hey. Here is the loss exceedance curve. You can tell, for instance, how many cases will be for the worst and the best scenarios. For instance, if you are looking at 10% of the cases that in the best scenario, you are exposed each year to lose $500 for this risk. However, if everything works wrongly in the worst scenario, you may think that, for instance, 90%, the worst 10% will be producing a loss that is around $9,000. So you can see how much is the risk. Another way to disclose the exposure is to have this calculation that tells you how much do you need to invest if you want to offset the risk for 10% of the cases, 20% of the cases, 40% of the cases. So you can even know, for instance, if you know how much you are investing in training and awareness on emails, you can tell, for instance, whether this control is efficient or not. Because of the exposure, you can set according to the tolerance that you are going to act for the 80% of the worst scenario. That is should not be reportable to the executive committee. And let me just go to the last case, that here we have an adversarial threat. So it will be a hacker that is accessing to client data because we are not encrypting and protecting a backup server and the infrastructure to use the backup server. So you can think about a scenario, then it's going to be, the server will be unavailable because of the attack. You will need to work much more on the investigation because you need to restore the data in the confidentiality. And then finally, you will have a higher fine, and also you will have clients flying. You will lose clients, and you can assess how much it will be the worst and the best scenario, linking the current controls to the ISO, and then doing the exactly the same analysis. The risk will be more improbable to happen. And finally, you can tell, look, if I want to assess 80% of the cases, this is my exposure now. It's justified that I need to invest $140,000. And then you can say that according to your escalation, it needs to be reported to the committee, and they need to select what they are going to do in order to treat, to mitigate or to manage this risk, and finally create an action plan with milestones. This is a model that you can use. It's very practical. It really justifies decisions. It simplifies a lot of decisions. So please reach out to me if you want to learn more. I am very happy to support once again cyber security, and I am fully available for more discussions in order to grow in the way that we are using different ideas in order to assess cybersecurity risks. Thank you so much, and best regards from Copenhagen, Denmark. Bye.